I would like to invite Muji to come on, where she will be talking about gas utilization in West Africa. Welcome, Muji.
Thank you, Digbala. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And good evening, everyone, and good evening to my fellow panelists. And thank you to the EFICO group for inviting me as a panelist on today's webinar. So today, I'm obviously very passionate about the gas industry. It's an industry that I've been in for about 18 years, and it's one that I hope to continue to contribute to in any way that I can. So this evening, I will be speaking on gas utilization in West Africa. What's the current state? What are the opportunities and what are the current challenges? So moving on to the next slide. Over the past 5 years or so, there's been a number of discoveries across the West African coast. If you think of countries like Ghana, Senegal, Mauritania, these are countries that have, over the last 5 years, discovered gas offshore. And this is very crucial in terms of the economic development and industrialization of these countries. So if you think of the Jubilee fields in Ghana or the Grand Tortue project in Senegal, these are all big gas projects that these are recent discoveries across West Africa. What this clearly shows is that the West Africa area remains very largely untapped in terms of the potential for gas discoveries. In West Africa today, Nigeria has the largest proven gas reserves and the ninth largest proven gas reserves in the world. So moving on to the next slide, it's obvious that resource is not the problem. We have this gas reserves, as Dayo mentioned. So the question is, how do we get the gas from the point of production to the off-taker? How do we ensure that this gas is not left in the ground and not commercialized? So to move the gas from one point to another, you need a transport infrastructure. And broadly speaking, you can either transport in two key ways. The first is either you have an actual physical pipeline or you have a virtual pipeline. In terms of the actual physical pipeline, there's just one inter-country pipeline across West Africa. I think it connects just about 4 countries across West Africa. It's called the West African Gas Pipeline System, WACP for short. It's almost 700 kilometers in terms of length, and it starts onshore somewhere called Itoki in Nigeria. It's onshore until it gets to somewhere in Badagry and then goes offshore and then finally terminates somewhere in Ghana in Takoradi. So if you think of Lagos to Ibadan, which is roughly about 100 kilometers in terms of distance, and you think of 7 times that, that will give you an idea of how long that pipeline is. In terms of capacity, that pipeline can transport about 800 million scoff per day of gas. So whether you're taking gas from Lagos to Cotonou in Benin or to Lomé in Togo or to Tema or Takoradi in Ghana, that's your pipeline to use. Unfortunately, the capacity of the pipeline is severely underutilized, about 20% utilization. I think the flip side of that is I also see an opportunity to increase the number of people that ship gas on the WACP. So if you have a project in, say, Lomé, you're trying to build a power plant, the good news is that there's an existing pipeline system that you can plug into and transport your gas to Lomé. Now, for countries that are not connected by the WACP, so Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, other countries in West Africa, there's an option of using a virtual pipeline to transport gas. And by virtual pipeline, it could be in form of compressed natural gas, which is a process where you compress gas and you put it into bullets and then you truck it using trucks. Or you could also have liquefied natural gas, LNG for short, which is a process where you liquefy natural gas and also transport. You could also use a floating LNG barge, or you could use a ship, an FSRU, and then connect a short spur line from the ship to shore, to where your project is. So we've talked about the fact that yes, we have the reserves. We've also talked about the existing infrastructure that we have across West Africa. So the question is, what are the opportunities? What can we actually use this gas to do in West Africa? So moving on to the next slide, you would see that from my perspective, I think gas can be utilized in three broad areas. The first is gas to industries. The second is gas to power, and the third is exports. So by gas to industry, what we mean by that is basically piping gas to industries. And these industries, whether you're a fertilizer plant or whether you are a cement company, what you can do is you get this gas and you use this gas for your processes. So you might have boilers. So instead of using HFO, heavy fuel oil, or using marine oil or using diesel, it's cheaper to use gas. There's been studies that have shown that gas is at least 40% more cheaper than the next alternative. So you can pipe this gas to maybe industrial clusters. For example, in Ghana, they have the Tema industrial area where you have a cluster of industries, and you can pipe this gas for these industries to use for their processes. Some industries can also use the gas as fuel for power. So there are certain industries that are off-grid, and what that means is they're not connected to the national distribution, electricity distribution company. So they can also use the gas to power their IPPs or their power plants and provide power for their industries. The second main use for gas is gas to power. It may interest you to know that most of the gas that is commercialized, at least about 70%, goes for power. So this is just gas as a fuel for power plants. So instead of using coal or using hydro, you may decide to use gas for your power plant project. And lastly will be exports. So this is just exporting your gas out of your country. It could be within Africa, or it could be somewhere else in the world. If you look at how we've used gas in Nigeria, for example, you'll find out that most of our gas, if you look at the pie, most of our gas has actually gone out for export. So the export market, the LNG market, is also very active, and is another opportunity for gas commercialization. So moving on to the next slide. So we've talked about the resource. We have the resource. We've talked about how to get the resource from the ground through infrastructure. And then we just also talked about what the opportunities are. So when you then decide on which opportunity to pursue, then you have to ask yourself, what would be my typical contracting structure? Obviously, this is just basics, and you'd probably need to amend this given the peculiarities of your particular project. But you typically have a project SPV, that's the company that's going to undertake the development of whatever project you're trying to do. You would need to sign, that project SPV would need to sign a gas supply agreement with the gas producer. That's the person that is bringing out the gas from the ground. And you also, if you're going to transport your gas through a physical pipeline, you need to sign a gas transport agreement. Depending on the location of where you're going to use the gas, you may need to sign more than one gas transport agreement. So for example, if I was going to sell gas from Nigeria to a power plant in Togo, for example, I'll need to sign one gas transportation agreement with Nigerian gas company, which is a transporter within Nigeria. Then I'll need to sign another gas transportation agreement with WAPCO. WAPCO is the company that operates the WAPP. So depending on the location of your project, you may need to sign more than one transport agreement. And then you'd also need to sign a gas purchase, sale and purchase agreement on the downstream side with the off-taker. So the person that you're selling gas to, if you're selling gas, If it's power that you're selling, then you need to sign maybe a power purchase agreement with the person that's going to be taking the power. But if you're going the virtual pipeline route, then you would need to think about LNG infrastructure development agreement and signing any other ancillary agreements that come with LNG development. So what are the challenges? What are the constraints that we currently see across West Africa? Daya has alluded to a number of this, so I will just move through them quickly. I think the first is infrastructure development. And I think I believe that the countries that are mostly affected by this are countries that discovered gas a long time ago. So there was not a lot of thought that was put into making sure that the infrastructure was connected and flexible. And those came as an afterthought. So it'll be fantastic for us to see governments and also the private sector thinking of the infrastructure and making sure the infrastructure is connected and that it's flexible even before the gas is produced, so that you don't have a situation where you have gas and you're trying to produce the gas, but you can't move it from one point to another because there's no infrastructure, which is where we find ourselves today in Nigeria, where we have the very rich eastern part of Nigeria and we have the gas demand centers in the west where we have most of our power plants. And we're just now trying to build OB3, which is a major transmission pipeline to link the east to the west. So infrastructure development, whether it's LNG, whether it's your gas processing plant, whether it's your pipelines, is a big constraint in the West African market. So for example, we have just one pipeline that connects just 4 countries in West Africa, and there are more than 4 countries in West Africa. Financing is a big issue. Gas projects are, quite heavy on the capex side. So raising financing is also a constraint. Most developers find it difficult to raise financing, not because there's no financing. I think it's because the project hasn't been properly cooked, and that's mainly because our gas markets are not well developed, and I dare to say some of them are not very credit worthy off takers. And if you don't have a project where you have the offtake agreement is extremely key to any financing. And I just spoke about the markets. The markets need to be developed. They need to be ready to pay for the gas. Political risk across West Africa, that prices into the cost of doing your projects. It also makes investors very adverse to investing in your polity. An example would be look at Senegal. Senegal has been relatively stable, one of the stable countries across West Africa. But we all saw what happened a few weeks ago with the protest and the riots on the street. Daya also spoke about government policy. So is government creating the right environment? Do we have adequate fiscal and incentives to encourage investors to continue to invest in the gas space? So those are some of the constraints that we see in the gas market in West Africa. I would like to leave you with just this picture of our beloved Africa. As you can see, looking very dark. It's a challenge, but I also think it's an opportunity. I think it clearly shows that there's an opportunity to use gas within Africa and within West Africa, whether it's gas to power, whether it's gas to industry, whether it's export. But there is a huge gap, as we can see. The electricity per capita is, I think, in the 30s. And let's just take a few seconds, stare at this and let it ginger up the discussions and keep the discussions going as to what we can do to make lighting up Africa a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insightful presentation, Moji. I think there's a number of items that resonate with me personally there. One is we have some infrastructure already in place, following on from Darius' talk about lack of infrastructure, but we haven't fully utilized it. So there's a great opportunity to fully utilize that. And I actually like that idea of, virtual pipelines to use the infrastructure further. Really great introduction on contracting strategy. Good to give people a bit of a feel for that involved. And I think the final one of the points you made around other countries actually thinking about when gas is discovered, making sure the infrastructure is flexible to actually get the gas to the places required. I think that, for me personally, would be very important for emerging gas provinces like Mozambique and Senegal as they begin to develop their gas industries to really make sure they don't fall into the same mistakes or errors that have happened in other African countries. So thank you very much for that,